So today's broadcast is sponsored by Mechi Wurzburger, the Ilu Nishmas. His mother, Mechi, has Yortzeit today, Boy Bioim, and his mother is Blima Bas Rab Chaim Aleh Shalom, and her neshama should have an aliyah, and she should be a good debater for Mechi and his family and for all the kindlech, all the kindlech. Today's also the Yortzeit of Rabbi Chanan Bunu Wasserman. Famous Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was brutally murdered, and I think he was gunned down and put into a mass grave in Covenant. He was actually in America. He didn't even have to go back to the war region, but he said, "How could I abandon my family?" And he went back, and in Covenant, he lived in Baranovich. His yeshiva was there, but in Covenant is where he was when he was rounded up and killed. He also said the last words that came out of his mouth, or at least that's how it's reported, is that the fire that's going to consume us will be the same fire that Hashem's going to rebuild the Beis HaMikdash with. I'm not sure what that means, what those words means, but that's supposedly what he was quoted as saying. He was also, I think, the closest Talmud of the Chafetz Chaim. And Rabbi Saberman spoke in Daguda a couple of weeks ago. He said, Pirkei Avos. So he quoted Rabbi Chanan as saying that as many people as possible should come visit the Chafetz Chaim in his home in Radin, because in Yeneveld, they won't even get, the Chafetz Chaim is going to be held in such high regard, they won't even let you get near the doorknob of his home. So while he's alive, Chaparine and become acquainted with him. The Kiddush Yod of Raglav. So we discussed yesterday the order of the Karbonos, because there was some discrepancy. Rabbi Eliezer had one shita, and Rabbi Kiva, there were three different opinions about what Rabbi Kiva held as to when the Musafim were brought. So just to do a quick synopsis, first thing in the morning, on Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol started off doing the Karban Tamid. And at that point, there's a machlokes, did he do the Musafim together with the Karban Tamid? And Rabbi Eliezer holds he didn't. Rabbi Kiva held he did. So the question is, did the Kohen Gadol makrib all 7 Kipsei Musaf right there with the Tamid Shachar? Or was he makrib 6 and 1 he left for later? Or was it only makrib 1 and then all 6 he left for later? Those were the 3 shitas that we had. Then, of course, he put on the big day lavan, and then the first thing he did was he shechted the par. He brought the keteris lefnai v'lefnim, and then he spritzed the dam of the par. After which he shechted the seir lash. After which he made the goyel. After which he shechted the seir lashem. Then he spritzed the dam of the seir lefnai v'lefnim. Then he spritzed both of their bloods towards the paroiches. Then on the 4 corners of the mizbeach hazav. Then on top of the mizbeach hazav, and then he mixed the bloods together. It's a question if he mixed the blood together before the mizbeach hazav or after. But after the mizbeach hazav, for sure the blood was mixed together, and he poured it onto the yesod of the mizbeach. It's a question if it's the south yesod or the west yesod. And after that, the Kohen Gadol, after he finished with the dam of the par, the dam of the seir, he said vidui on the seir mishtalech, and this is all with the big 11, of course. And he sent it out to the Ish Iti Midbar. And while the Ish Iti was going to the Midbar, he cut open the par and the seir, and he took their imurim out and prepared them in a bowl for putting them onto his mizbeach later on. Once he got confirmation that the Ish Iti had already reached the Midbar, which means the Sir Lazazel, its mitzvah was done, then he was able to continue on in his avodah. And at that point, he read from the Sefer Torah, and there was a question: is if he read it, he had an option to read it with the B'dei Lavan, or the option to wear it to wear his own clothing. After that, he took off his own clothing. He took off the B'dei Lavan. He for sure took off the B'dei Lavan at that point. He put on the B'dei Zav, and at that point he was makriv the aisle, there was an aisle that's mentioned both in Parshas Pinchas as well as in Parshas Achimois. It's a shayla if it was one aisle or if it was two elim, but he was mocked of that he had in the big day zov. Then he once again had to put on the big day lavan to remove the kaf and the machta, and then he switched back into the big day zov and he did the Talmud Shel Ben Abayim and the Talmud Shel Nereis. And at that point, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he would have also finished off all of the Musafim as well. So some of the Musafim might have done with the aisle, and some of them the Musafim were done later on, but that's where he did most of his avodas. And that's what we're holding now. So Zok to Gemara, Kiddush Yodov V'Raglov. The Gemara now is going to drill down into the details of the avodas that he did once he changed out of his big day lavan and into his big day zov. So we need to analyze some of the psukim because that's what the Gemara is going to be doing, and it's going to be very relevant to understand what happened. Now we know that when he did all the avodas in the big day lavan, he did not in that same round take out the kaf machta. First, he switched out of his big day lavan into the big day zov to be makar of the aisle, and then he switched back into his big day lavan for the sole purpose of going back into the Kodesh Kodshim to take out the kaf machta. But the problem is, if you look at the psukim almost sound at first glance like there was not a second round. He did everything in the Kodesh Kodshim, including removing the kaf and machta in the same round as the first time he was wearing the big day lavan. And let's look at the end of the Parsha in Achimosh after it discusses all of the avodas he did in the big day lavan. It says, so it talks about the final avodas as we learned, which was the vidui on the seir mishalech b'samach aharon shteyadav al rosh hasarachai izvadalo b'skol avodas b'nei Yisrael b'skol b'shem v'chol. And then it says, B'shilach b'yadishi b'yamidbara, the Naz Asar lo b'skol b'noisam, B'shilach es Asar b'midbar. And then there's a very interesting pasuk here. Aaron HaKohen right now is standing in the big day lavan because he just said vidui and sent off the seir lazazel. And what does the next pasuk say? Pasuk Chav Gimel. Uva Aharon el oil moed ufashat es big day habad asher lovash b'voyel hakodesh. Then Aaron HaKohen will take off the big day bod. Which big day bod? The one that he put on. An interesting lashon. Did you ever take off clothing that you didn't put on? The Gemara is going to ask that question. So this sounds like he did everything and he took off his clothing. Now, if you noticed, the Torah never mentions specifically the going into the Kodesh Kodshim to take out the kaf and machta. But this pasuk is a little bit unusual in the way it expresses it. Then after that, the pasuk talks about the next thing, which would mean his big day zahav, which is the aisle. The aisle either was one aisle or two aisle, depending on the machlokes that we looked yesterday, but that's what he did at that point. So it's very interesting to note over here. There's no mention at all about changing out of the big day lavan into the big day zahav, doing the aisle, then putting back on the big day lavan to take out the kaf machta, and then change back into the big day zahav. The pasuk doesn't seem to mention that explicitly, but what is unusual is the way the pasuk expresses him taking off the big day lavan, and that is so what the Gemara is going to suggest is that this pasuk that talks about taking off the big day lavan is actually referring to the second round where he put on the big day lavan again to take out the kaf machta. That's what this pasuk is talking about. The problem is if this is what the pasuk is talking about, we know that the aisle which was an oila that Aaron HaKohen brought in his big day zav, that was brought before he went in to take off the kaf machta, because he was wearing the big day lavan to do the main avodas. Then he switched into the big day zav to do the aisle, and then he had to switch back into the big day lavan to go back in to the Kodesh HaKodeshim to get out the Kaf HaMachta. You don't see that. And not only that, where does the Torah first introduce the ayil? In the very next pasuk. So this almost sounds that after the last time he went into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, for instance, to take out the Kaf HaMachta, only after that did he makriv the ayil. We know that's not true. We know that after the first round of avodas, he was makriv the ayil in Big Day Zov, and then he switched back into Big Day Lavan to go in to take the Kaf HaMachta. So the Gemara is going to elaborate on the order of these two psukim and show you and prove to you that in fact this pasuk here is referring to putting on the Big Day Lavan once again to go back into the Kodesh Kodeshim to take out the Kaf HaMachta. And it's inevitable to say that these two psukim are out of order because, in fact, he did the oila before he went back in to take the Kaf HaMachta. That's going to be the first half of the Gemara. Then the Gemara is going to point to some other psukim that seem to be out of order. It says, "V'schela v'chatos yak termes beirim." So that we know, in fact, he did in his Big Day Zahav later on, right? He prepared in the Big Day Love, and he might have prepared the emurim in the bowl, like we discussed, but actually being makruv b'man mizbeach, in fact, was done in the Big Day Zahav later. So that would make sense. And then it says, "V'amshalech es asir la'azazel v'chabes begadav v'rachat es b'sar b'mayim v'achin yov al machna." This we know for sure occurred before, because when was this fellow sent? This fellow was sent to the Midbar in the Big Day while he was still wearing the Big Day Lova. And in fact, we learned that the Kohen Gadol had to get confirmation that it was already in the Midbar before he was able to start laning. So this, once again, seems to be a little bit out of order. And then it says, this parachatos, vesir achatos, shehubas domim l'chabed b'chodesh, yoyim b'chutzamachal v'sarfu b'eshus haroshim v'sarim. This is also out of order, because we discussed a while ago the parachatos and sirachatos were sent, and we even learned that this happened at the same time as the Kriyas HaTorah. And that's why the Mishnah told us that you cannot see both of them happen. You either can see Kriyas HaTorah, or you can watch the Kohanim burn the parachatos and sirachatos, but you can't be in two places at once because these were too far apart. So in fact, this occurred while the Kohen was still wearing the Big Day Lavan, while he was reading from the Sefer Torah. So this pasuk also happened before, a little bit out of order. Means the people burning the korbanos became tamei. So we have two issues that are out of order. We have the ayil ha'om that seems to be out of order because we know that was before the last time he went into the Kodesh Kodeshim to retrieve the Kaf HaMachta. That's out of order. And this parachatos is for sure out of order as well, because we know that they were sent michutz l'machana while the Kohen was still wearing his Big Day Lavan. This is already after the whole story is over. That's what the Gemara is going to talk about. So let's see what the Gemara says. Tanu Rabbanan, uba ahayon el oil moed. Aaron came to the oil moed. Lama huba. What did he come for? So this is that pasuk. This is that pasuk that we're talking about, which is pasuk Chav Gimel, right? To buy an oil moed of pasuk begadav. Lama huba. What was he coming for? So the Gemara lahoitzi is a kaf v'samachta. This pasuk seems to be a little bit out of place, and therefore we learn that it's talking about the second time that the Kohen Gadol came into the Kodesh Kodeshim to retrieve the kaf and the machta. How do I know that? This Gemara we had at the beginning of the Masechta. Shekol parsha kula nemar laseder. In fact, the psukim in this parsha are all in order of exactly what happened. They're perfect. Chutz mi pasuk seh. The only pasuk that's out of order is this pasuk, which places the ayil after he went in for the Kaf HaMachta, when in fact we know that the Kohen Gadol was makter the ayil in his Big Day Zov before he went in to retrieve the Kaf HaMachta. My timer, how do I know this for a fact? How do we know, in fact, that occurred? Maybe he was only in the Big Day Lavan once, and in that round he also took out the Kaf HaMachta. That would be much more efficient. And then afterwards he changed into the Big Day Zav, and then he did the ayil and everything else. Zok to Gemara, I'll tell you how I know this. Amar of Chisda Gemiri, we know, I guess we know Allah Moshe Mashinai from door to door, that Chomesh Tvilois Ba'asara Kedushin Toivel Behen Kohen Gadol Umekadosh B'Aviyah. We know that there was a series of 5 Tvilois, which means there were 5 transitions. We know there are 5 Tvilois and 10 Kedushin because as we know, when you take off the clothing that you're removing, you make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. When I say you, I mean the Kohen Gadol. And when you put on the new clothing, once again you make Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. So every set of a tefillah and 2 kiddushin represents a change of clothing. The Amrit Kesidron, and if you're going to argue that the psukim are in order, and that means he only wore the big day love on once, then there would have only been 3 transitions, because first he would have been wearing the big dissolve. That's unanimous. He wore the big dissolve at the beginning of the day to do the carbon talmud. Then, so there would have been Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim before he put on his big dissolve. Then when he switched from the big dissolve to the big dissolve, there would have been a second tefillah and the second set of Kiddush Yadayim V'Raglayim. And then after he switches out of the big dissolve and back into the big dissolve, there'd be a third. But where do you have 5? The only way you can explain 5 is if you say that he went back and forth again. He went back to the big dissolve and then back to the big dissolve. And the only way you could explain that is if you learn that he did the aisle in his big dissolve after he did the main avodos in the Kodesh HaKodeshim, so he had to switch back from the Lavan to the Zav, and then he switched briefly back into the Lavan to go back in to retrieve the Kafumach. So this is proof that these 2 psukim must be out of order. Zog to Gemara, Matzka Flor Abzera. Frank Abzera, I understand you've proven that he had to change back again. That's very possible. But who said the psukim are out of order? You're saying that why did he change to the big dissolve before he went back to get the Kafamachta? It must be to be makriv the aisle. Were there no other karbanis that he could have been makriv? The Dilma Mafsik le Bisir and Nasa Bechutz. There was a seer on Nasa Bechutz. Maybe that's what he did. So why is it that the Torah is out of order? Say that the Torah is in order. You need to find some reason for the Kohen Gadol to have switched back into the big dissolve after he did the main avodas in the Kodesh Kodshim. Say he did the Seir Nasa B'chutz, which the Torah doesn't explicitly state where that was done, and then you can at least say that the Torah is in order. And then he did the Hitzos Kafel Machta, and then he switched back into the big dissolve, and maybe he did the aisle later on. Why are you insisting that it's the aisle that was done before the Hitzos Kafel Machta? Why are you insisting that's the case? And because of that, you're saying that the psukim are out of order. Omar Abaye, because Omar Kra, the pasuk says, the Yotza Ba'asa Esei Losai. And that we learn, Taichin that pasuk is Mi'etzir Rishayna Ovid Eloi Ve'elam. Rashi says, let's look at the pasuk inside again, because it becomes much more lichtig if we look at it inside. It says after pasuk Chav Gimel, which we said is referring to the Hitzah, is Kafu Machta. It says V'rachat es B'sarei V'mayim V'machim Kodesh V'lovas V'gadov, and then V'yotza V'asa Esei Losai. Now, the Torah, up until this point, never discussed leaving the Kodesh Kodeshim. It's been talking about all the Avodah Shebechnim, and it never mentioned that he left. The very first time that the Torah mentions any type of Yitzia, any type of leaving the Heichal and the Kodesh Kodeshim, is over here. And it says, what did he do when he left? He brought the aisle. So Zokt Rashi by us. Zokt Rashi, good morning. Zokt Rashi by us. It says, V'zu Yitzir Rishayna Mura Parsha. The Torah doesn't mention anywhere that he left. This is the first time he left. It must be that the first time he left the Kodesh Kodeshim, which is after the first round in the Kodesh Kodeshim, that's when he did the aisle. And therefore, we have proof that the psukim are out of order. That the pasuk that discusses the Hitzos Kafu Machta must have occurred after he brought the aisle and not before. That is the first approach. Rav Omar, I have another proof that the psukim are out of order. Because it says, Upashat es bigdei habad. In the pasuk that discusses the Hitzos Kafu Machta, or the pasuk that we want to prove, is referring to Hitzos Kafu Machta. U'ba'arin al oil madu pasuk bigdei habad asher lovash. He should put on the bigdei habad that he took off. So Rav is going to ask, do you ever take off clothing that you didn't put on? The Torah needs to tell me that he's taking off the clothing that he put on. Does a person ever undress from anything other than clothing that he did dress with earlier? What is the Torah signaling to us by sticking in these words, Asher Lavash? It means Shalavash Kfar. It must mean that he put it on again, which means he had worn it the first time, and now he put it on again. So now the pasuk makes perfect sense. The Lavash Hakayin, he should take off those clothing that he put on again. Why did he put them on again? Because he went back a second time to do the Tzas Kafu Machta. That's how Rava proves that these psukim must be out of order, because there must have been something else done in between the first Levisha of the Big Day Lovin to the second. Zok to Gemara.
Wouldn't it be more logical just to use the one word again instead of the cryptic Asher Lavash?
Which word should it use again?
I don't know. How do you say again in Lashon HaKodesh?
I mean, you should have said Pashat Otapam as Big Day Abad.
Okay, right. That would be more clear.
So once again, we have a lot of questions on how drushes are made. But in Echanami.
Right. So
it would have been even more clear if the pasuk wrote it in order.
Yeah, that's right. So there's got to be a reason
why it's out of order.
Yes.
I'm gonna address that.
Why it's out of order and why it doesn't say again instead of a cryptic lesson that only one shita can hold.
Only the Amaroim have the exclusive on.
Right.
I don't know. But let's see how the Gemara appears. The same question. All you've proven to me, Rava, is in fact that there was another set. But how do you know that the psukim are out of order? How do you know that it was the ayil that was before the second Levisha? Maybe the ayil was after, and it's another avoided that was done. The Rava relies on the same svara. The first Yitzia from the Heichal, from the Kosh Kolchim, led to the ayil. So they ask, why couldn't the pasuk just put it in order? Why did it have to be out of order? So they bring down from the Goyin, the Vilna Goyin had a moedik pshat. We learned it is bezois yavi aron al kodesh. We learned at the beginning of the Masechta that even though the Kohen Gadol was only allowed to go into the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim once a year, Aaron the Kohen himself was able to go into the Kodesh Kodeshim whenever he wanted, as long as he followed the same process that the Torah dictates for the Kohen on Yom Kippur. However, there's one deviation allowed. When Aaron the Kohen wanted to go in any time, he was able to do the Haitzas Kafu Machta at the same time as all the avodas. He didn't have to do the ayil in between. And that's why the Torah places it out of order. And it's also cryptic. Zok the Goyin is because Aaron HaKoyin, if he wanted to go in any time, he was able to stick to the order, and he didn't have to put on the Big Day Lovin twice. That's how the Vilna Goyin learns. Frank the Gemara, you made an assumption that B'chol HaParsha Kula Nemar Ala Seder. Everything's in order. Well, I'm going to prove to you that there's another instance where we find that the Psukim are out of order. It says in the next Psukim that we discussed that after the Emurin were put on the Mizbeach, then it says, they took the meat out to burn, which would indicate that first was the Haftarah Emurin, and then the main meat of the behemoths were sent out to be burned. Yet we learned, in fact, that that's not the order of how things went down. Rather, Harois Kohen Gadol Kishul Koyer, so clearly, the Parvasir and Nisrafin occurred at the same time as the Kriyas HaTorah, where the Kohen was still in the first round of the Big Day Lavan. Vilu Eimur Echatos, yet Eimur and the Chatos, Basar Hachimakelu. They're put onto the Mizbech later on, while the Kohen had already changed out into his Big Day Zov. So clearly, these Psukim as well were out of order. Zok the Gemara, say that once the pasuk discusses the aisle, which was out of order from the Vaitzois Kafu Machta, the morning, from there on, the Torah is not in order. So don't say just those psukim are out of order. I'm an Ayin Aleph and Aleph, the third wide line. Let's say from there and on is out of order. Correct the Gemara, that's not how you do things. Umay chozes the mishabshis kroi. Why are you saying that the psukim are out of order? Maybe Shabbos Masnisa. Maybe you got it wrong. Maybe in fact that your order is wrong. You're following the Mishnah, and because of that, you're chopping up the psukim. Maybe did it ever dawn upon you that maybe the pasuk means what it says? Amar Baya, Amar Kra, you have rice Muneu Bay from the psukim that the Mishnah's order is correct. It's not just by chance. The Mishnah's order is correct and it stems. The way the Mishnah knew it was from the Diyukim that we're about to make. Because it says, V'amishaleach v'hasayru. Right after it discusses the second going into the base, into the Kodesh Kodshim, it says, and then it says, V'asayru faisal. So V'amishaleach is referring to the Sir Lazazel, and V'asayru faisal is referring to the parachatos that was burned, and the Gemara is alleging that this parachatos is out of order. So Zok to Gemara, when it says V'amishaleach, we know the Meikara. We know that the sending of the Sir Lazazel didn't happen at that point. It happened much earlier, even before the Kriyas HaTorah. So therefore, Af Soyer the Meikara. So too, when the Torah says Vasoyer Poisa, referring to taking the behemoths out to be burned, that also means that it had occurred before. So there's a sort of a remez in the pasuk itself that the items discussed here actually occurred before, while the Kohen was still in the Bigillah. Fact Gemara, why look at it that way? Adarabba, let's Soyrif be the anchor. Ma Soyrif the Hashta. Just like Soyrif, we want to allege occurred now, and that it was only sent out to be burnt. The bodies of the Seir and the Par were only sent out to be burnt later on. Af Mishalech the Hashta. Maybe in fact the sending out of the Ishiti Lazazel also happened later. Zok Gemara, you can't say that. Because Veha Mishaleach the Meikar Mashma. The word Veha Mishaleach as a Soyer has built into it a connotation that this has occurred before. And therefore the Veha Mishaleach and the Veha Soyer both indicate that these avoiders that we're discussing now actually occurred before. And the reason why the Torah goes back to address them now is first the Torah wanted to tell you all the steps, and then the Torah went back to address what the halach is with those people who did these things. They become tamei, but the Torah didn't want to deal with it while it was discussing the actual order of operations. It would be a diversion. Let's focus on the order of operations, and once the Torah lists that up, then the Torah goes back to comment on what happened to the people who did these individual avoiders, that they became tamei. Rav Amar Kra. Rav has another raya, in fact, that the Azazel happened before, and that the Haitzos of the behemoths, the Chut Lamachnet, to be burnt happened before. Because it says about the Sar Lazazel, Yomad Chai. The Sir Lazazel Vasar Asher Allah Allah V'Agirl Yomad Chai. Ad Mosa Yehizok Glamid Chai. It says, the pasuk says Yomad Chai, L'chaper Allah is the lashon. Let's have a look at it. So what do we learn from the Chaper Allah? Zokt Rava, Yom Chai at Moshe Yizok Lamed Chai at Shas Kapara, until the Kapara, which means this Rikas Dam. The Amos of Shas Kapara is Shas Matam Donim B'Suloi. You see clearly, the Torah says very clearly that as soon as the dam was spritzed on the Kodesh Kodeshim and the Paraychis, the Mizbeach, as soon as the avoid of the Rikas Damim was complete for the Par and the Seir, that was the time that you're supposed to send out the Sir Lazazel. So you have a clear indication, Mineu Bey, from the pasuk that discusses the Sir Lazazel, that it occurred while the Kohen was still in his Big Lavan, much earlier at the time that these Rikas were finished. Zok to Gemara. Now we're going to get into an interesting Agadah to go. Asim Mishalech. The Kohen Gadol sends out the Ishiti to take the Seir Lazazel, but he doesn't get confirmation. He doesn't have 100% confirmation. So let's say the day after Yom Kippur, the Kohen Gadol is going shopping for Arba Minim, and he's in the main shuk to buy his Arba Minim, and Asim Shaleach Matzei B'Shuk LeKohen Gadol, and this Ishiti he bumped in to the Kohen Gadol the next day. Omer Loi, he wants to report back that everything went well. He knows the Kohen Gadol is curious to know, so what happened? How did it go down there? So Omer Loi, he would address in public, in the shuk, he would address the Kohen Gadol. He would say, Ishi Kohen Gadol, Asinu Shalichusa. We did your shlichus, we took the seir to the tzad. How about matzah b'beisai? What if he didn't meet him in a public place? Rather, he met the Kohen Gadol in an intimate setting. Amar Loi, he tells him, Mechayeh Chayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom, who's Mechayeh Chayim, who gives life to those who are alive, Asinu Shluchusai, we did the shlichus of the Rebbeinu Shalom. So why is there that discrepancy between referring to the shlichus of the Kohen Gadol in public and referring to the shlichus of the Rebbeinu Shalom in private? So the Mefarshim say that when you're in public, you want to show deference, you want to show cover to the Kohen Gadol. So therefore, you'll say that Ishi Kohen Gadol, we did your shlichus. But Avad is the Rebbeinu Shalom shlichus. So when you're in a Makam Tznuah, where you don't have to build up the honor, you don't have to be Megadol the Kohen Gadol. Therefore, you say it the way it is, that we did the shlichus of the Rebbeinu Shalom. That's one shot. However, there's another shot that says Pum Fakert. Really, you always have to say the shlichus of the Rebbeinu Shalom. However, the Rebbeinu Shalom's name is Kadosh. You don't throw around the name of the Rebbeinu Shalom in the shul. So therefore, you say Ishi Kohen Gadol. But when you're in an intimate, more pure setting, Avad you say Mechayeh Chayim. There's another interesting twist on this, and that is why he could have said Rebbeinu Shalom Asinu Shluchusai. What's up is Alosha Mechayeh Chayim. So one shot is that the Kohen Gadol was at risk of losing his life every time he went into the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim. So the Ishiti would tell the Kohen Gadol, Mechayeh Chayim, Baruch Hashem, you're alive, I can talk to you today, the day after Yom Kippur. He was Mechayeh you, we did his shlichus. You don't want to say that to him in public because you're sort of saying, you're not from the ksherim. So therefore, in public you refer to him as Ishi Kohen Gadol, but in private you say Mechayeh Chayim as if to be happy that the Kohen Gadol survived. But the third pshat, we learned earlier that who was chosen to be the Ish Iti? A person who we knew was going to die anyway. They saw in the Mazolish this guy was going to die. So he's saying Mechayeh Chayim, the Rebbeinu Shalom, who could do anything, he should be Mechayeh me. He should allow me to escape my death sentence, even though I was the one who was chosen to take the Sir Lazaz. Amar Rabba, he mivtu Rabbanan ma'adadi b'pamadisa. When Rabbanan would gesegen sich, when they would leave each other, Amri Hachi, they would say the following: Mechayeh Chayim, Yitin l'cha Chayim aruchim v'toivim u'musukanim. The Rebbeinu Shalom, Mechayeh Chayim, should give you a long life, a good life, and a mesukandik life. And the Mefarshim discuss whether it's Baruchnis or Bagashmis. Let's say it's both. Rebbeinu Shalom should help that when we finish learning to go to work, it should be a Chaim Toivim Aruchim and Musakanim. We should have success in Ruchnis and Gashmis wherever we go. David HaMelech said, "Es halech lefnei Hashem b'artes hachayim." We say that in Hallel. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Zeh makim shvakim. This is referring to makim shvakim. Rashi learns what that means is people need things nowadays. With COVID, we realize that we can't always get whatever we want when we want it. We're used to having plenty, and whatever we need, we can get with the click of a button. We're used to getting everything. But now we realize you can't always get things. Things are no longer available. Supply chains have been interrupted. In those days, they didn't even have the same sophisticated supply chains that we had. So David Melch was asking, since I'm going into Golos, and I'm going to be traveling around, Rebbeinu Shalom, help me that I'll be able to get whatever needs I have, I'd be able to find them when I'm in the shuk. That's one shot. Another shot that Rishonim learn is, I'm leaving now learning because I have to go make parnasa. So I'm being out in the world. Help me retain the same level of ruchnius and kedusha, even when I'm in the makom shvakim, I should be able to retain my chayim. Now the pasuk says, "Ki orich yamim u'shnois chayim." This is my favorite pasuk. Ki orich yamim u'shnois chayim esifulach. What do you mean? I'm going to add you live years. Aren't you always alive? What do you mean? Shnois chayim, live years should be added to your life. V'chiyei shanim shel chayim, v'yei shanim she'eno shel chayim. Are there years that you're not alive and then later on it transfers into years into our life. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Zok Rabbi Lazar, Elu shnoisev shel adam hamishapchais alav ma'ira l'taiva. Many people struggle, and then they get a break, and their life turns around, and they're able to become very wealthy and make a big parnas. So that was the bracha. The bracha was everybody who struggles, the Rebbeinu Shalom should turn around their lives, give them that break, and they should have a wonderful life, a shnois chaim, a life of plenty where they have whatever they need with a shefa bracha v'atzlacha. So the Rebbeinu Shalom, we should all have shnois chaim yisifulanu. We should, all of us who struggle, the Rebbeinu Shalom should help that we should run into a tremendous shefa, and we should be able to have a shiras and shefa and bracha and everything. And those of us who are wealthy should become so much wealthier that they should look back at these years and say, then I was still poor. Now it's shnois chaim. That's the bracha that we daven for. Karich yom shnois chaim yisifulach. Zok Gemara Vayter. The pasuk says, Aleichem ishim ekra. I'm going to call to you ishim, referring to men. But it's funny that it doesn't say anoshim. It says ishim almost to sound like a woman. It's like a gender fluid type of expression. Vasapshat. Amur Abrachia. Elu Talmidei Chachamim. We're referring to the Talmidei Chachamim. Shedoimin lenoshim. They're doimit to women, meaning Rashi says they're soft, they're not assertive. Talmidei Chachamim are more edel. Yet ba'oisen gevura kanoshim. They express and display a tremendous gevura by being goyber and the Yitzhahar. Amur Abrachia. Nowadays we don't have a mizbeach, but you want to be mekayim the mitzvah of nisach hayayin. So what's the itzah? You should always serve talmidei chachamim wine. Shenemar elechem ishim ekra, referring to the talmidei chachamim ishim miloshen ishay reich nichayach. I'm going to call to them by giving them nesachim. So they ask, I don't understand. Every other carbon, we say that if you say the parsha, it's as if you brought the carbon. So why can't you just say the parsha? Why do you have to give wine to a Talmid Chacham? So the Mefarshim answer, it only says that Allah l'gabe karbonis, l'gabe teres, l'gabe nesachim. It doesn't say that. So the only way to be mekayim ken nesachim is to buy wine for Talmid Chacham. So they say over a shtickle joke. It says in the Gemara in Sanhedrin that before Mashiach, because of the Mashiach, the wine is going to become rare and wine is going to become more expensive. Why? Because everyone's going to read Zachaim, that everyone's a Talmid Chacham. People are going to think if somebody can read an Ar scroll and he can read a Masifta, Talmid Chacham. So there'll be so many Talmid Chacham, everyone's going to be buying wine, and that's why there's going to be a run on the wine. If someone sees that his children aren't staying with Torah, and he wants to recover it, so the law is Yisa Bas Talmid Chacham. He should marry a Bas Talmid Chacham. Now those who learn this, he should take a second wife, and a Bas Talmid Chacham who will bring Torah into the family. But there are those who learn more Pashut, that he should make his children marry a Bas Talmid Chacham. Shenemar im Yaskin Ba'aret Shroshai. If his roots are starting to get old, meaning the children are not sticking to the roots, offer Yamis Gizoi, and his trunk is in a dead ground, meaning that his roots are not being stuck to. The children might be turning away from Torah. So then, Merayach Mayim Yafriach, he should get the Rayach of Mayim, which is the Bnei Torah, the Asa Tzir Kamoineta, and that'll make the new plants that he's going to cut down just like the original seedlings that he planted with Torah. The Yom Tov Hayu Oisel. The Kohen Gadol made a Yom Tov to his buddies when he survived the avoidance of Yom Kippur b'Chodesh Kodesh. Tanarban. Ma'azav Kohen Gadol lecha Jotzor Beis Hamikdash. There's a Kohen Gadol who left the Beis Hamikdash. Va'az l'kulam basrei. He had a whole line of paparazzi behind him because they were celebrating with him that he came out on the Beis Kodesh HaKodeshim. And what happened is he was very proud. He had all these chassidim behind him. He had a whole entourage. It's Geshmak. It's covered. But even the Chazinu, the Shmaya of Avtalion, as they're walking home, they see Shmaya and Avtalion going. So this whole crowd left him and they ran to Shmaya of Avtalion because they were Talmidei Chachamim. So V'shteitzach, they wanted to go after the Talmid Chacham because Torah is first. So Shavkula today, they dropped the Kohen Gadol like a hot potato. But Shmaya of Avtalion, and they went to follow Shmaya of Avtalion. Now L'soif also Shmai. Now we know Shmai and Naftali were used Talmid Chachamim, but Rashi says they were also Mibnei Banav Shel Son Cherev. They were Gerim. So here the Kohen Gadol was insulted that Shmai and Naftali usurped his covet. So L'soif also Shmai Baftal Naftur Minei the Kohen Gadol. They wanted a Gezegenzech from the Kohen Gadol, so they wanted to be respectful towards this Kohen Gadol. So the Kohen Gadol told him a very snide remark, told them a snide remark to give him like a joch. Amar Lahan, he told him, Yezin b'nei amamin l'shalom. The people from the other nations, you people should go home in peace. That's right. You people should go in peace. In other words, like, you're second class citizens. Amar Lei, so they told him back, they gave it right back. And they said, Yezin b'nei amamin l'shalom. You know why we should go in peace? The Abdin Uvda the Aaron. Because we're being peaceful and we're being respectful and we came to Gezegenzach from you. We're behaving the way we should. And in fact, you're right, we should go l'shalom. But below Yesi by Aaron l'shalom, but the Kohen Gadol doesn't deserve that same bracha, below Ovid Uvda the Aaron. He is not behaving the way Aaron HaKohen should behave. So it was a pretty sharp retort. Yeah. So there are those who say that they told him, why are you alive? You're only alive is because Klal Yisrael is out there davening for you that you should be successful. So it's only because of us that you're alive. So don't be such a knacker. Don't be so full of yourself that you made it out alive. You only made it alive in the schus of Klal Yisrael. Zok Gemara weiter. Kohen Gadol mishamish b'shmoina kelim. The Kohen Gadol wears 8 begadim. Ba'hedjit, and the Kohen Hedjit ba'arba with 4 begadim. What are the 4 begadim? Ksainas is the shirt. Michnasayim are the pants. Mitznefes is the hat. Ba'avnit in the garden. Most of love Kohen Gadol. The Kohen Gadol has extra begadim in his wardrobe. And he has the choshen, the breastplate, the ephod, and the apron, ume'il, and it looked like a big pair of blue tzitzis, the tzitz, and he had the tzitz on his forehead. And ba'elu nish'alin u'urim v'tumim. And it's with these, when someone came to ask u'urim v'tumim, it was when he was wearing all of the begadim. The ein nishon, but not anybody can come ask whatever he wants from the u'urim v'tumim. The ein nishon el melech, either a king, or lav bezin, or l'misha shatziba tzarech, or someone who is quote unquote essential. An essential worker is somebody, so like an NHL player might be able to ask from the Urim V'Tumim, but not a Talmud Chacham or someone from the learning. That's nice. Zok Tehillah Gemara, Tanar Ban. Dvarim shenamar bahen sheish, when the Torah is describing begadim, and it uses the word sheish in discussion of those begadim, and the Gemara is going to offer examples of all these things. Chut and kafel shisha. That means each thread with which they wove the cloth was spun from 6 individual threads. So it was more like a cable than a thread. Moshzar, if the Torah uses the word moshzar, but without the word sheish. So we're not talking about a place which is sheish moshzar. We're talking about a place where it only says moshzar. That means shmoina. That means each thread is spun from 8 threads, which is even a thicker cable. Me'il shnei masar. The me'il was spun from threads that were 12. We could almost make a bridge out of. We could almost make a suspension bridge out of these threads. And paroichas was esrim of arba, was spun from 24 threads, and the choshen ve'ephod esrim mishmoya 28. And the Gemara is going to explain in detail how this goes. Chut and kafel shisha minol. How do you know that sheish means that it's going to be made out of 6 spun together? Zok to Gemara, we know it as follows. Lamakra, the yasu of saksainis sheish. Let's read the pasuk inside because the Gemara is skipping out the words in between that aren't relevant directly to this drasha. So the yasu is a kasnoi sheish, masa erglar nevanav. That's a mitznefesh sheish. It's very repetitive. There's pari hemekbois sheish. There's michnas abad sheish moshzar. So we dash in as follows. The Yassin Zakson is Sheish, number 1. That's Amvisnaf is Sheish, number 2. There's Paramek Boy Sheish, number 3. There's Michnas Abod. Bod also counts. Sheish. So it says 5 times Sheish. And this is about Sheish Mosar, Chamisha Kroiksi. The Torah is repeating Sheish so many times. What is the purpose? Chad Lugufei, the Kisna, Nahavu. One is to tell us that it has to be made out of linen. That's the Pashup Shot. The second time it says Sheish, Nachachete Chuton Kofel Shisha, that each of its fibers should be spun from 6 threads. That's the Lashon Sheish of 6. The Sheish literally means linen, but we're using Sheish to darshan that it means 6. The Chad, the third time, is to tell you Sheyiu Shazurin. Shazurin Rashi is Yachat Kulan Shisha. So they have to, I guess, not the 6 individual, but they have to be spun together. The Chad L'Shar Begadim, and the one to tell you that other Begadim, Shaloi Nemer Ben Sheish, we're going to identify later on in the Gemara a different Beged, where it doesn't mention Sheish. So the Sheish mentioned by these big Tikuna is extra to tell you that there's some other as yet unidentified Beged that also has to be 6. The Chat La'akiv, and want to tell you that if you didn't do it exactly as the Torah directs it, it's not going to be kosher. Zoktamar, my mashma, the high Sheish Kisnan. How do you even know that Sheish means linen? Yosy Simon Yuma Bad, the Bad, it says Bad, I'm sorry, it says Bad. It says Michla say Bad. What does Bad mean? Dover ha'oila min akarka Bad Bad. Something that grows individual fibers. And Rashi tells us that the flax plant doesn't grow branches, it's just one stem with leaves on it. So each I guess thread of flax or each plant of flax is one individual stem, not individual. So that's how you know that bad means linen.
Sheish means linen.
Well, bad and sheish is the same. It says son is bad made out of sheish, right? So the Torah says.
Well, from the question he's asking, how do we know that sheish means linen? Obviously, it doesn't mean linen.
Well, it says this miklasei abod sheish masar. So we're using the word bod as 1 out of 5. The Gemara considers the bod as 1 out of 5 words of sheish. So the Gemara somehow is equating bod and sheish, because I guess the Torah refers to the Michnasayim with 2 terms, bod and sheish. So the Gemara is assuming it's the same.
Okay. It seems to me that because he's asking the question, how do you know sheish means linen? That was not the original word for it. In other words, sheish became linen. Maybe because they used 6 threads to make it.
Well, what the Gemara says that one of the word sheish is to tell you that they actually used linen. How do you know that they used that product?
Yeah, so that's
maybe the word bud, since one of the sheishes is not really the word sheish, it's the word bud. So that's how I knew it. It says maybe bud is what tells you that it was linen. Bud is the identifying factor.
Right, that's possible.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, it looks like Rav Kanievsky asks David's kasha.
Oh,
in the article. Yeah. He explains interpretation actually denotes an off-white color. Only in a borrowed sense does it refer to linen. In fact, we find in scripture the same term being used for marble, which also has an off-white color. The Gemara therefore questions on what basis we know that the word being used here is referred to flax rather than some other off-white material.
Beautiful. So it's mamish like David asked. Devaltic. See, we have David. We don't need Chaim Kanievsky.
Yeah.
It's actually Rav Yisrael Yaakov Kanievsky. I guess that's his father.
Oh, that's the stipler. Yeah. Wow. Okay, that's beautiful. So bud is really what identifies the min. Sheish is not identifying it. Maybe it's wool, because wool also has individual fibers. If tuli mivtzala. The thing with wool, Rashi says, is they grow clumped together and then eventually they separate. In fact, the more kis nanami if tuli mivtzal. Ksonius also breaks apart. That where kisna agav lukusa mivtzal. Ksonius only breaks into multiple threads after you beat it, but wool naturally becomes that way. So that's how we know that these begadim are made out of linen. We'll just learn Ravina and then we'll stop. Ravina mar mehacha ha'ari pishtim yual roisham u'michzei pishtim yual masneim. There's a pasuk in Yecheskel that's discussing the big kahuna of the future, and it clearly says pishtim. So that's how we know that the big kahuna were made out of pishtim, out of linen. Okay, let's stop here because we're running late. Shkoich Victor for enlightening us.
See, even now, an Amma Aretz can look like a Talmud Chacham with the art scroll.
We got to buy you a
That's how
bottle
we
of
do
wine. So.
We learned earlier. We asked the kasha earlier. Why wasn't it in its proper? Why don't you say it's in its proper order? Why do you have to? So my father told me that after the war, when people were liberated from the concentration camps, they had to get new documentation. So somebody asked, he was there, somebody asked, should I say I'm older than I am, or should I say I'm younger than I am? He says, why don't you say exactly how you are? Das hat mir nicht so viel angefallen.
Beautiful.